saved very well. So, alrighty, so conversation with Dan Collison of TriadSENTral. And so Dan, let me pull up here our slides, our different phases slides. We discussed these phases last few weeks in class. And I know your group, TriadSENTral, does a lot with helping current pastors who are in kind of revitalization efforts, or just trying to lead their church in a more missional engagement with the community. You also do a lot with church planters.
Right.
And so just tell us a little bit about TriadSENTral and what your team does for leaders, and then even some of what you do on the side as a consultant coach for other churches.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate the invite to come and hang out with you guys a little bit. Talk about something that's been important to me for going on 20 years now. So that's great. Yeah. What we're trying to do through TriadSENTral is actually raise the whole tide of Christian ministry and leadership development in the Triad area. A lot of times, if you look at what different church planting organizations or networks are trying to do, they focus so much on church plants that the rest of the body of Christ gets kind of left behind. And so through our main team of 4 people and then our extended coaches beyond that, we try to have a very balanced approach to not just include church planters, but also pastors of existing churches, also churches in transition between pastoral leadership phases, and then marketplace ministers as well. And we really feel like of those 4 areas, it's the marketplace ministers that are going to be a large, significant part of the Christian ministry and outreach going forward. It's going to be people who are in the marketplace, maybe even founding businesses for the specific purpose of reaching Christ through those businesses, the clients who visit their business, the vendors that they have, the surrounding community, and the people that they hire, using these businesses as platforms for the gospel of Christ, and to see missional small groups or church plants spring up out of that. We want to help churches in transition by providing some good evaluation, assessment tools of the congregation, of the community. We have a large section that deals with demographics of communities, so that's helpful both to churches in transition as well as to church plants. Because it's very, very important for us to understand our mission field. And a lot of the reasons why we have churches in crisis right now is because they've lost sight of what their mission field is, and they're no longer directly connecting to the people right across the street in some cases. And then church planting, what we're specifically trying to accomplish is helping a guy feel like let me start from addressing the problem first. One of the several problems have happened in the last 15 or 20 years of church planting in North America. Probably the single biggest issue being isolation of the planter and his family. It can be a long, lonely road, and TriadSENTral believes that that's not the way it should be. There should be, as iron sharpens iron, we strengthen each other, we encourage each other. Church planters should be part of a network, and we're not going to tell a guy what network he needs to be a part of, but we got to be a part of some network to get encouragement and be sharpened in one's own capabilities. Plus, I mentioned the family. A lot of church planters' families experience the highest level of sacrifice in the church planters' experience, and a lot of people, it's just unrecorded history of what has taken place on the backs of the families of church planters, who are typically seen as the ones out there leading the charge to keep the work moving forward, but they're leading the charge because their wife and their kids are supplying the fuel, and there's only so much fuel that can be provided a lot of times. So we're very, very passionate about the whole family environment, and those two things together have led us toward establishing what we're calling a pathway to readiness, where we we'll work with a church planter, even up to 3 years or more, to help him be the absolute best possibly prepared relationally, financially, vocationally, in terms of the mission field, all the rest of it, as prepared as possible to take that step. And so that's why we provide a full range of assessments. We do use our assessments to disqualify candidates that we don't feel should be necessarily in frontline church planting ministry, but the primary purpose of our assessments are to determine what kind of support and help a person needs in order to be an effective church planter. And then, so we start with assessments, then we bring in coaching. We have journey coaches that'll stay with that church planter over the long haul, up to 3 years or more, and just check in periodically. They're concerned about the planter's mental, physical, emotional health. Concerned about the family, concerned about how the plant is progressing in from like the 30,000 foot level, so to speak. And then we have waypoint coaches that come in for specific purposes, to help that planter cross different thresholds, whether it's a leadership development issue, an organizational issue, something that the individual himself needs to be ready for in order to take things to the next level. Might be getting some help on breaking the 100 barrier or the 250 barrier or the 500, whatever it might be. So we have assessments, coaching, training is next, whether it's through short-term, highly focused training events that we either plan ourselves or participate in as a group. So for example, next week we've got 10 or 12 that are going down to Florida for the Exponential Conference. And we use that as a training/coaching opportunity. So we want to make sure that those who attend don't just get their little booklet from whatever workshops they attend or plenary sessions they listen to and throw it up on the shelf when they get back and get so immersed in the ministry again that they lose what they gained. So the whole week is we're driving down together, we're staying together, we're driving back together, and then there'll be short-term coaching and maybe some additional training that'll take place out of that. And then the last one is vocation. A lot of church planters think that they're going to make enough money in church planting in order to provide for their families with their wife staying home taking care of the kids. And that's in the vast majority of cases that is a pipe dream. It's just not going to happen. What tends to happen is that about 2 years into a church plant, the guy runs out of money with no real means of making money in a short-term kind of fashion, and church plant closes, community loses the influence for Christ that church plant brought, and that family is soured against organized ministry opportunities for the gospel. So we don't want to see any of that happen. So that was maybe a little more than you were looking for. I don't know, but that's the big picture of how TriadSENTral is in that. I contract with TriadSENTral, so I actually have my own consultancy for church health and revitalization, and so I work as part of the TriadSENTral team. When the need arises for that, and so I've found natural church development to be the premier church assessment and coaching platform to move forward from, and so that's what I specialize in, and a few other things as well. Certified as an interim pastor, that sort of stuff. Never knew there was a certification of being an interim pastor. And that's part of the problem. Most of the time there isn't, and the guy just comes in and basically does a chaplaincy for the church in between pastors, and that doesn't help anybody, really. So there we go.
Nice.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for giving us a good explanation, so that as these guys are where they are now in ministry, and then even in future, they know who to contact. I know Derek here has a heart for revitalization, and working as a youth pastor at his church now, would love to see it revitalized, even from his role as not being like a lead or senior pastor. So let's discuss. Just want to take a few minutes to discuss through each of the different phases, and what I've asked Dan to really just kind of think through before he comes is, during each of these phases, what are the questions that they're asking this future planter? What are the points that you're giving? What are the, hey, make sure you're doing this those type of things? Just kind of give you guys a good perspective so that when you do step alongside a group like TriadSENTral, you have a consultant who's helping you, which I do definitely recommend. Frank White is one of the other TriadSENTral consultants, and he helped me tremendously about 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago. I was in youth ministry and thinking of planting, but just really not knowing where to go next, and just really exploring ideas and stuff. And he would come, and he sat down several times, about every other month. We'd get together for about a year, and we would just kind of chat, and he would ask me just very specific questions. He would give me resources, help me think through things. And even at the end, toward the end of us conversing, it was one of those where, we should probably wait a little while. I mean, it wasn't him saying, oh, you're just not going to be able to do it. It was just where you are now in life. Let's just wait. And I kind of really came to that realization. It was good for me. It was good for me to talk to a consultant who has experience doing this. And so Frank on his team was a key person for me. This is about 3.5, 4 years ago, I believe, when I was talking with him. So Dan, when we were talking about the envisioning phase, we're discussing. Let me get down to the bottom slide. You're thinking through. There's this idea in my head, and I want to plant a church. Well, that's a great statement, but there's a lot of motives that can be behind that. There could be good motives. Oh, there's no gospel-centered church on this side of town or in this community, so I want to plant a church there because there isn't one. Or there could be a motive that I kind of started with years ago was, all the churches are doing it poorly, I can go do it better, so I'm going to go plant a church. So those kind of motives. So we talked about praying. During this envisioning time, this is the very, the conception, the ideas form. You're assessing things like your calling. You're praying through that. You're exploring avenues, areas, partnerships, that sort of thing. You're also doing a lot of discerning. You're meeting with mentor, your pastor. You're talking over with your spouse, family. So what are the questions during that kind of, when you have a guy who just comes and says, hey, I want to plant a church. Can we meet and talk? What's one of the first questions that you ask of him as you're helping him think through what it could look like?
Yeah, first question is, and it's almost a statement rather than a question, because we feel so strongly about it. But the first kind of topic is, who are you doing this with? Who is walking this road with you, especially in terms of exploring and discerning? As on the one hand, a check and a balance, and on the other hand, hey, have you thought of? So, it could be, another pastor, it could be a business leader, it could be your grandma. It doesn't really matter who it is, as long as they're going to talk to you honestly about, what's going on and challenge you. One of the big things for TriadSENTral is, we're about planting churches and all that other stuff, but the top line, it's leadership development. We're interested in helping leaders plug into God's very best plan for them. When I planted my first church, a little moment of honesty here, I had my resume out there. I graduated from seminary, blah blah blah. Served in one church, and then that opportunity closed up, and I was looking around for what who's going to hire me next, kind of thing. And this one situation was looking really good. Thought it was going to pan out to be my next step was a little bit of a larger church, so that was great. And then the church decided to change direction. The position I was applying for wasn't even available anymore. And they were like, okay, thanks for applying. For me, that was devastating. And so I looked at my wife. I said, you know what? It was based on a couple of relationships and conversations I had. I said, maybe we should just go start our own church. And she looked back at me and she said, maybe we should. and that was That was it. That was the start of it. That's how it got. And so my first church plant in Pennsylvania with the Evangelical Free Churches of America was just based on, forget it. I'm tired of putting resumes out. I'm going to start my own thing. Good things happen from that, but it wasn't really started on a good, solid foundation of discernment and prayer and exploration. That is so important. And in that whole thing, it's like, okay, decompress, take a breath. What's really happening here? Spill it. What are you holding back from everybody else about this great story of, we're going out to push back darkness and make disciples who'll make disciples and all the rest of it? What's really going on that's your motivation for wanting to plant a church?
Either you guys have any questions related to that? Because in a way, every student in the class is kind of in this phase right now. You're in a church planting minor in school, and so there's a little bit that there is some kind of vision or idea of what you're looking to do. This vision phase for me, it's been 8 years of this. I've been in this kind of mode for 8 years. I guess I'm in the preparing phase now, kind of a thing. I'm kind of have gone a little bit to the next level through what I'm doing with my church, but in some fashion, you guys are kind of in this phase. What is it that you would ask a coach or consultant? What are some of those questions you're thinking of? Maybe it's along the lines of, well, what should I be thinking through now? Or do either of you have any kind of specific question related towards that?
Yeah, and I just lost it. Well, it's nothing.
Kelly's there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey,
there
Miss
she is.
Kelly, welcome aboard.
Nothing necessarily too technical. This might even be one of those, depending on the situation, kind of deals. I don't know, but I was just curious. How let's say someone is just so gung ho about planning or whatever it may be, but you realize that they really either need to slow down or they don't need to do it at all. How do you convince someone like that to just take a moment to breathe and don't go further than where they're at now? I mean, I think that's something important to think about too, because I'm the kind of person, my personality type, when I see something, I'm going to do it. That's just all there is to it. You're not going to stop me. But at the same time, I realize that it wouldn't be the wisest thing for me to do to just jump into something. My wife is perfect at taking time, and whereas I'm ready to go ahead and get it done.
Yeah. Well, what you've done is scratched at the root of the difference between a consultant and a coach. Really, a consultant is the kind of person that you come to and you ask questions and you get advice, right? They tell you, they might give you a couple options, pick one of these, but they're going to tell you what you should do. And sometimes I've got to do that with people. The coach is going to be, if you ask a coach a question, the coach is going to ask you a question back.
Right. Right.
So coaches are way more about having you think through it and come up with solutions than they are about telling you, even if they already know what you should do.
Yeah.
So that's why so much about our process starts with assessment. And we do actually do assessments at 3 different levels. We have a first, the initial set of assessments that it just sort of paints a picture of a person. And so when the results of the assessments come back, and you're looking at a gift mix, and you're looking at a personality type, and particularly in terms of those 2 tools, you're looking at a green, a yellow, or a red light in terms of the typical church planter's profile. Then if you got a yellow light or a red light in those assessments, which are completely, they're your answers, right? I didn't have anything to do with it. They're your answers, and your answers are coming back saying, look, compared to 80% of other church planters, you got a yellow light or a red light, which they're indicating you're probably not going to be the typical solo, get it started from the ground up church planter. So how does that strike you? Like what do you think when you see those?
Yeah.
So I'm going to start asking a series of questions to help you come to the point of discovering for yourself, maybe one of 3 different options. Forget the assessment. What do they know?
Yeah. Yeah.
God's called me and I'm doing it, We forget that even Moses' call, there was a pretty prolonged period of time between God putting a call on his life and Moses actually doing what he was called to do, right? So sometimes you just got to take a breath and work a process. But so, forget the assessment. We're going to do our own thing anyway. Or number 2 is, wow, I didn't realize, that I was quite so far gapped from everybody else. Maybe have you thought about doing this as a team effort together with 1 or 2 other people? And then the third option is maybe you weren't necessarily put together to be a church planter, but is there a church planter that that you could be a really strong support for? And the vision that God's put in your heart matches up with the vision that He's putting on his heart, and man, you guys could knock it out of the park if you did something together. So there's kind of 3 options. There are other options, but those are the 3 that I'd start with. But the assessment is what gives you the key to be able to have those conversations, because it's information you supplied that I've got experience with. What are the signs that this is trying to say, and then we take the conversation from there and go a little deeper.
And I do have one more question, unless Matt has one. What, in your estimation, what has been the biggest obstacle for new church planners or whoever from furthering their vision or whatever it may be? Like maybe it's moral, something immoral they've done, or maybe just their family or something like that. But in your estimation, what has been the biggest hindrance?
Biggest hindrance, in my opinion, far and away, is themselves. They get in their own way. They don't understand themselves well enough, and so they end up sabotaging the very work they're trying to accomplish because something's crept up. They've been too isolated. They've taken a negative view toward every other church, and they think they're going to be the savior of Christendom. It's the planter himself, however that gets revealed. Sure. But I mean, there's no question in my mind it's the single biggest threat to a successful church plant. The guy who's trying to plant it.
Very nice, very nice. Let's go to discuss a little bit the kind of the preparation phase. Here we're researching, we've explored and we've discerned and we've kind of picked a place, let's say, and of course in the preparation is still always praying and discerning, exploring happening, but we're kind of narrowing it down. Okay, I feel led, and my church is really feeling like we should plant on the south side of Winston-Salem. Let's just use that for an example. I'm talking about in researching, enlisting, enlisting as in you're getting to build a core team. You're, of course, evangelizing. You've moved into the area. You're making disciples, sharing the gospel, but you're also, maybe finding there's other Christians. Now, sometimes, especially if you move to a new city, you may take a team with you. Planting is done that way. Sometimes you move to that city, partner with a church, and from there start building a team. So you're kind of enlisting people to join with you. What are some of the ways that TriadSENTral helps with the research part of, you mentioned a while ago like demographic studies and that sort of thing. How else do you help a planter just kind of really assess and research that particular community where they really feel led to go?
Yeah, it's a couple of ways. Let me just jump back to the demographics for a second, because demographics for a good church planter, demographics makes their eyes actually literally turn to the back of their head. It's just mind numbing. We use a tool called Mission Insight, and it pushes past demographics. It actually includes spending habits of people within that geography as well. It combines a lot of the the extra information that's out there sort of in the cloud, and brings that to bear together with the demographics. So you're not only learning about income per capita and household makeup and all the rest of that. It actually pushes, Mission Insight pushes that a whole lot farther toward actual tendencies in that community for religious preference, for charitable giving, for openness to new things, to traditional versus contemporary, and even the fullest report will help reveal, for people who have stopped going to church, why? What are their top reasons for not going to church anymore? For people who are in church but are thinking of stopping going to church, why? And so, that provides a whole lot more insight into what the surrounding community is like than just the census data. So that is a very large key to us. And then you take that information and you actually you just prayer walk the area, and you're looking for opportunities of openness. You're looking for people of peace. If you've used that kind of terminology here, yeah. And you're looking for places where people are gathering, particularly with somewhat of a social element that would be in what you think is your target group, the people that you're trying to reach. So you want to find a couple of local coffee houses that you can just go and sit at and take your laptop or catch up on Facebook or whatever while you're listening to what's going on. Be exposed to the people around. You need to introduce yourself to pastors of churches in other areas. In that area, and you need to get to know them with hopefully an eye toward receiving their blessing for starting your church plant in their area, so to speak. You need to talk to the chief of police and the battalion chief for the fire company and say, okay, what's going on in this area. You need to find out if there's a business improvement group in the area, if it's a chamber of commerce or something along those lines, and talk to some of those business leaders. What are the hardships? What are the successes that are being seen right now? And just get a much fuller picture about what's actually going on instead of just relying on your assumptions. And then take that to the level of actually being able to tell a couple of stories about what your community has. Changed the names to protect the innocent, right? Mm-hmm. But if you can record a couple, 2 or 3, 4 video stories, that will be gold to you in terms of keeping a prayer team, active and engaged with your ministry as you're able to tell the stories of people in your target area that have a need for Christ or have an economic need that you can meet in Christ's name or something along those lines.
So some of the things you alluded to remind me of the idea of city mapping. How you're finding the spots where people meet and that sort of thing. And next semester I'm trying to line up the guy Keelan from Cook from Southeastern who does he leads in their city mapping. I believe he does that some through as like a consultant with State Convention. I think he's done some things. I've seen him with him. So we're actually going to try to have him show us how to do a city mapping of how do you map out a community and say, okay, here's the places where people are meeting. Here's where this here's the kind of maybe the poorer side, or here's where the refugees live, and here's where so you kind of find out the landscape of the area, so you start knowing what kind of groups to start or where to focus some of your ministry things on and stuff. And so I think that's really key and very helpful. Let's progress to the launching. This is the phase or the stage where you are preparing for and then actually starting what it is. And we discussed during the lecture time how if you're kind of starting what I would call the traditional way, not because like traditional like organs and pianos and that, not like a music style, but as in, you know, you have a launch team, you're, you know, starting a worship service type idea, you're hoping to have a good number for that, you know, you do some, you know, that's kind of the more traditional way. And then there's I guess the non-traditional, more organic approach of like, well, we're just kind of starting a house church, you know, so that looks very, very different from starting a large worship gathering as part of your kind of start, or you're just starting a, you know, hey, dinner tomorrow night kind of a start. So these are very, very different. Both are very, very, of course, needed. I kind of want to focus a little bit more on the more traditional side of planting, because I think that's definitely the more common approach. And I know that just in, you know, and what I've been experienced and have helped with is, you know, the more common approach. It really helps to get a church established, get them going. And so, at what point are you helping the potential planter, or I guess he is not so much potential now? At what point do you kind of help him start walking through things like, okay, well, are you going to have a plurality of elders, or, you know, a deacon board, church governance type ideas? That kind of at what point, you know, because let's say launch is going to be next Easter, which is kind of a common time. That's when we have the first worship gathering. How far out are you trying to coach them on, okay, you've got your core group of 25, you know, selecting leadership and doing that? Kind of walk through a little bit maybe about just really kind of setting up that structure to get them for leadership, get them going well.
Yep. Can I draw a picture?
You can.
Where's
you can
where's
draw
the
it
best
up
way
here.
to do that?
Okay. Let me.
Oh, I was going to do it.
Yeah. Get you a blank slide. Let's make sure that thing reads everywhere. What color do you want? Black.
It's got to be green.
Gotta be
Church
green.
planting, it's got to be green.
Alright, so this whole.
Will
this
Matt
white
and I have
square
an
will be
opportunity
your
to
canvas.
draw?
He gets it first.
Wonder what you might draw. That's okay.
Yeah.
I want to start this question. Start this answer in a way which doesn't look like it's going to answer your question, but it will.
Okay.
So, life cycle of organizations. Have you guys done any work in this class or otherwise? Okay. The ever-present, always applicable bell curve.
Yes.
It's amazing the number of times you'll refer to a bell curve in your life. But this holds true for organizations of any kind. It's true of businesses, it's true of churches, it's true of community organizations, baseball teams, whatever. It's always true. You can take the life cycle starting with birth, ending with death, and divide it along this bell curve. I mean, you can get pretty interested in this with 6 or 7 different you know, levels along the curve. But let's suffice it with 3. So we'll call this one incline, recline, and decline. This is cool. You get to write on a board with no dust going up your nose.
If you need to erase it, you just pick up that eraser and it actually does everything.
Yeah, I was figuring. That's cool. Okay, so we got those 3, and they sort of make sense on their own, right? This is the beginning of organization. We'll just keep calling it church for now. But the beginning of the church plant, you got hopefully exponential growth. You know, lots of new things. Experimentation for programming and whatever's going on, but also you've got new systems that have to be put in place. You've got discipleship that's taking place here in a big way. Lots of new stuff. Recline, it's like, we did pretty good with this. It's all right, and so we start to just relax a little bit and let off. This is where in the life of the church. Things that here were all new, we've sort of narrowed down all those different options into, okay, this is the way we're doing church. And so you get into a pattern. Others would call it a rut across the top here. And the problem with that is if there's no new energy being introduced into your rut, it gets deeper and deeper, and it becomes tradition. And once it becomes tradition, doesn't matter whether you're selling widgets or leading people to Christ, you're gonna lose energy. You're gonna start sliding down the other side of your bell curve into decline, and left uncaught, decline will inevitably lead to death. In fact, if we're going to talk about churches as being living organisms, whether you want to use the term organic or whether you just talk about from Apostle Peter, or a building of living stones being built up together in Christ, right? Or Paul's illustration of us being many members but one body. It's all there in one way or another. Here's what happens when you're on the incline. A lot of your I'm going to switch colors. There we go. A lot of your energy, your activity, your thinking, a lot of that is outward, because you're thinking about your target group. You're thinking about winning people to Christ. You're thinking about discipling them, and that's all great. You're thinking about community events. You're thinking about marketing. All these things. Everything is outward. How do we get our message out? Well, the further you get up on this side of the curve, you start to see a little bit of a transition in the way that the energy is still coming out, but less and less of it is escaping the trajectory of the curve. And that's because as you gather more people, or as you sell more widgets, or whatever it is you're doing, as you do more of that, that process itself requires greater attention. In a business world, you got to have maintenance. You got to have your sales force. You got to have the back office in order to manage everything. In the church world, you got to have a nursery. You want young families to come? Yeah, we want young families. And for a little while, who cares if the little kids are running around in the gym or wherever it is that you're movie theater or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But it gets to a point where that stuff does start to matter. And so the energy begins to, the focus begins to be more in line with the actual line of the curve, until that recline actually earns its name. And then what happens is you get past that recline, and the energy is almost exclusively focused directly back into the organization. So the degree to which we allow that to naturally happen is the degree to which the life cycle of our church or other organization is shortened. So if you want this to be just a couple of years, from birth to death, let it happen all on its own. And a couple of years from now, you'll be wondering what happened. If you want something that's going to stretch this a little bit, then take some of this energy in this area, some of this focus, and put it toward the systems that are not going to sustain, but that will multiply. Huge difference between those two things. So when you're talking about trying to sustain something, all you're trying to do is avoid death. You're looking at survival. But if you put focus on multiplying, then something cool begins to happen. Because you will put into place here, it's a natural place of sort of building process and procedure anyway. If you put energy here, not into just keeping what we have here, but actually into multiplying what's taking place here, some of that energy gets put off into spawning new ministry. Typically speaking, if a church has not planted a daughter church in the first 3 to 5 years of its existence, it never will. Yeah. Now, typically, it can be done, but if you've not captured here and actually done your planning and organization from the perspective of a church multiplication strategy, it's not going to happen on its own. It just doesn't. And so you gotta release some of that here. And then what that also does is, by the time most organizations are coming through this recline phase and heading down the decline, what it does for you is give you the opportunity to extend the incline into another life cycle. You're still going to be facing the reality of having a downside, right? And so you need to have that in the back of your mind, because you're coming back to this whole energy thing on this new curve. So, which gets it, I love your diagram, by the way, about the multiplying, and so on everywhere. This is the only way, according to what everybody understands about the theories of organizational dynamics, this is the only way to actually have a successful long-term strategy toward church planting. So, where are you going to start with the development of your elders or your deacons or your ministry leaders? Day one. Absolutely day one. You're not going to call them that at the start. You're going to save that for somewhere down the road, like somewhere down in here probably, where you actually make the office of elder or the position of deacon, and you empower people to do that because you want, need another color, you want all of this period of time to be your discipling and mentoring of the people that you are then going to install into those positions, who will then help you leverage this energy transformation to beat the second half of that recline portion of the curve and go into another growth cycle. Okay? So, if we're going to talk about the church being a living thing, we got to recognize that stuff has to die along the way. And our church is eventually going to die. But we can push that part off by being aware of and intentionally focusing our energy in a multiplication strategy, as opposed to just letting things happen naturally.
So it almost fits with kind of the, talk about the human growth analogy, if we talk about the conception phase of so it's really when you have a new child, so to speak, that starts a new life cycle.
Yeah.
I mean, for the husband and wife, that's kind of a new life cycle. It's almost like spawning that new ministry, it's that new church, and then their life is going, but your life's still very much a part of theirs, so to speak. Yeah. Because that's very good. Very good. Any questions about that? That's helpful for me. Very cool. Now admit it, you really like drawing on the thing, right?
This is awesome. I'm gonna get one for like myself. Why not? Then you can tell me how much it is. Was that a question digging in?
Oh no, Kelly was commenting that the audio was really good today. Sometimes our audio is not the best. So
maybe it's just the little
I
microphone.
think Kelly has a question. She says I have one.
Oh, go ahead, Kelly. What's your question?
Well, he said that if a church has not multiplied and made it start another church within 3 to 5 years, then they never will. Is there no? I mean, I understand that statistically makes sense. That's what the norm is. But is there anybody that is like seeks to encourage churches that have been around for a long time to try to multiply to make another church, even though they've been there for a long time, or is it like no, they're too stuck to try to do it, or what is or is it really like no, if they don't do it within the 3 to 5 years, then they definitely won't?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for asking the question. That is that would be in the side of our ministry called church revitalization. So we're trying to bring new life where where there hasn't been life for a little while, or trying to bring a restored order of health. So yes, it is possible to recover that. It's just a whole lot more work to catch up further down the road than it is to do it that way from the start. That's the only real difference. If you're doing it from the start, then you're not having to worry about coming up against tradition, or we've never done it that way before, or just the baggage from years and years of how things have worked.
So it's kind of like how when you were drawing the curve on that decline side, all the energy is being focused inward. It's really hard to shift that energy to an outward focus, because at that point, when you're in that kind of the decline, the church is in, we just have to survive mode, and so the pastor can't really, doesn't have quite the time to maybe mentor that young guy who they could send out as a planter, because he's having to maintain all the chaos in his own church and trying to help all those structures. So the energy is always going in. It's just tougher to get it to flow out, but it can be done. I mean, we watched. I know your group did some with Revo Church, and so for First Baptist Church of Rural Hall, all their energy, they were in that decline phase. All their energy was being poured into their church, and they had an interim pastor who said, listen, the best thing for you guys to do is to focus your energy into helping this new church plant. And so they merged. And for them, that was their way of reverting that energy, was to really just say, we're going to dissolve and merge and become part of this new church. And now the church is growing phenomenally and doing well, and they're getting ready to start a Hispanic church inside their church as well. And so it's just very cool what, so there's different ways of that happening, but like I said, it is tough. Because you have, when things become traditions, they're just hard to overcome, because people love the fact they've always had Sunday school. Well, then the new way, maybe Sunday school is not the best for that context, or that new church, something like that. So you have to kind of overcome those. Kelly says it must be affected by the mindset that the members of the church have from the beginning too. Yay for Hispanic. Her and her husband want to come back here to the area and plant Hispanic churches.
Awesome.
She's in Chile now, and in August they're moving up here. So we'll be able to hang out with Miss Kelly and her husband up here. So,
That's fantastic.
It's also why we talked when we discussed about multiplying. You're building a multiplying mindset from the beginning. In your envisioning phase, when you have a vision for a new church plant, a key component of that vision should be replication. How you're going to multiply and build that into the mindset of you, your leaders, and your people going forward. So
and that's one of the things that I really like about. That's why I chose natural church development as sort of the process that we run through this whole thing, because it was actually birthed overseas. It's not even an American thing, and it's been tested and proven in 90,000 churches worldwide. Less than half of those actually in the United States, but churches of all sizes, of all ages. It's principle based, and so it transcends culture, transcends continent, transcends language even, we as North American Christians, we are very program driven, and we got to break out of that, because our programs stifle us when it comes to being able to genuinely connect with people and build things that are going to have a sustainable life cycle, like we hope churches will.
Very good. Well, let's we got a few more minutes. Let's talk a little bit about the establishing part. Because this is after the church is going, and this, really the establishing part, it's from launch day forward. You're really always establishing in some sense. You're always building, you're always strengthening. So let's just give a hypothetical date of, after 1 year of this new church has started, and they've been going for 1 year, what are the questions that you're now asking that same guy that, years before you're asking, well, why do you want to do this, and who are you doing this with, those type of questions. After about a year or so, what are the follow-up questions that you, or make sure the pastor's thinking through?
Well, I'm really encouraged to see that you have APEST in there on this particular slide, because that is phenomenal. And there are a number of ways at getting to that same element, but that's crucial. You got to have a well-developed, a multifaceted leadership approach. It can't just be driven by, one or two or even three of those gifts. So the challenge at that point, in my mind, becomes, okay, how are you keeping your procedures from getting in the way of your connection to people? Like, it's got to be about the people always and forever, short of Christ. always number one. And so, but a lot of times we like to build things. We like to say, okay, here's our process, and this is how it's going to be done, and okay, we're finished with that. Let's just use it now. It's the machine. Turn it on. And time and time and time and time again, we see in church plants, in established churches, in mission organizations, it's when it gets to that entrenchment that the smell of death is already coming over your organization. And so, in what ways is it being kept fresh? And it can be done in a number of different ways. A lot of them are contextual and cultural, even. But you gotta be able to find that balance. So my question would be, what is the balance between the process and the people, the calendar, and the I'm trying to think of another C word and not doing that so well, but the calendar and the just being responsive to the things around you. So when you find out that there's something interesting that's going on, are you already hamstrung from actually being able to participate in that because you've made too many choices that are hemming you in? Do you understand what I'm meaning by that? So yeah, it's you got to keep the freshness, but you got to the organization, the establishment is a tool, and that's all it is. And if the tool needs to change, then you got to change the tool.
That's good. That's good. Well, we always wrap up with like everything we've talked about ends in multiplication. And so the idea is to repeat. And since we've got about 10 minutes left, and we want to review some of those other things, I think we'd probably agree that, I guess we would understand, even with what you guys do at TriadSENTral, you want to help this pastor now become that kind of commissioner, that sender of another person, and then step alongside that new person and kind of help do that. And so maybe next semester when we get into this, I'd love for maybe you and some of your team to come through and maybe even digest some of these ideas a little bit fuller. Possibly even as you were doing some things up here, I'm already thinking of a lecture or two I may want you to do for me, and come and maybe record and lead in class, that sort of thing. And so you got my wheels turning. But
bring cookies.
Derek says bring cookies or donuts. We like donuts too.
Krispy
So
Kreme.
let me close this out, and I'm gonna